You are listening to HOA Karma Files. This is the pettiest snow emergency ever. Karen screamed that my de-icing was insufficient and she would issue a safety violation unless I redid it. You just failed inspection, and I am submitting the fine, she yelled, waving an ice scraper at me like it was a gavel. Sleet tapped against my black puffer jacket, and I could see my breath in the freezing air. The sidewalk in front of my townhouse was scraped clean, salted, and dry. She was holding the scraper out between us, like a verdict, orange cones scattered around her feet in the snow. I work as an airline baggage supervisor, so I have seen every kind of chaos, every kind of unreasonable demand, every kind of person who thinks volume equals authority. This was all three at once. Tiffany Parker, election committee chair for the Woodland Drift Village Association in Hillsboro, Oregon, had decided that my sidewalk was a safety hazard, even though it was cleaner than half the block. Behind her, a tow truck idled at the curb, exhaust puffing white in the cold. My car sat in my driveway with a ski rack on the roof. The rack, she claimed, blocked the sidewalk even though it was parked completely on my property. She had a handheld radio clipped to her belt and she kept touching it like she was about to summon backup. "I do not negotiate with winter violations," she said, her voice cutting through the sleet. The radio crackled and she lifted it to her mouth. "I need confirmation on the tow authorization," she said into it. A voice came back, garbled and distant. I could not make out the words, but Tiffany smiled. She lowered the radio and looked at me. "Your vehicle is in violation of the emergency snow clearance rules. You should have read the rules before you moved in, sweetheart." The way she said sweetheart made my jaw tighten. I kept my hands in my pockets because I was saving one clip for the finale, the one piece of evidence that would flip this whole thing upside down when the time was right. But that time was not now. Now I had to deal with the tow truck and the cones and the ice scraper she kept jabbing toward my driveway like she was conducting an orchestra of persecution. I stepped forward and the ice cleats clipped to my belt loop clinked together. "The sidewalk is clear," I said. "There is no ice. There is no snow. I salted it this morning." Tiffany shook her head and bent down to grab one of the cones. She moved it 2 feet to the left and set it down in a patch of slush at the edge of my driveway. "That is a slip hazard," she said, pointing at the slush, "and your rack extends over the property line." "It does not," I said. "The rack is on my car. My car is on my driveway. The driveway is my property." She picked up another cone and moved it, this time placing it directly in front of my garage. "The rules say any equipment that could obstruct pedestrian access during a snow emergency is subject to removal. Your rack counts." I could feel the sleet soaking into my knit cap, the blue fabric getting heavy and cold. I pulled the hood of my puffer jacket tighter. "This is insane," I said. "You cannot tow my car because of a roof rack." She lifted the radio again. "Proceed with the tow," she said. The voice on the other end confirmed, and the tow truck driver climbed out, a big guy in a yellow reflective vest, pulling a chain toward my driveway. "I have a client meeting across town in 2 hours," I said, my voice rising. "Road conditions already make travel risky, and now you are taking my car?" Tiffany smiled, a cold, tight smile. "Then you should have complied earlier." She turned and walked toward the tow truck, her boots crunching in the snow. I pulled out my phone and started recording, keeping it low at my side. The driver hooked the chain to my front axle, and I could hear the metal clinking. The tow hook chain pulled taut in the foreground of my view. The whole thing felt surreal, like a fever dream, where the rules did not matter and logic had left the building. The driver yanked the chain, and my car lurched forward an inch. I stepped toward him. "Stop," I said. "This is not legal. You did not give me notice. You did not post a warning." He looked at Tiffany, and she waved him on. "Keep going," she said. "I have the authority." I looked past her and saw my neighbor, Greg, standing on his porch with his arms crossed and a smirk on his face. Greg was a mail carrier, and he had seen Tiffany pull this kind of stunt before. He gave me a nod, and I knew he was paying attention. That mattered, because witnesses were going to be critical when this landed in front of the board or a courtroom. The driver lifted my car another few inches, and the ski rack scraped against the garage door frame. I winced. Tiffany moved another cone, this one going right next to my front tire, pointless and theatrical. She kept the radio in her hand like a prop, like she was directing a disaster response instead of harassing a guy who cleared his sidewalk on time. "I do not negotiate with winter violations," she said again, louder this time, like she wanted Greg to hear. The sleet picked up and I could feel it sliding down the back of my neck, cold and invasive. My phone was still recording and I made sure the angle caught the chain, the car, and Tiffany gesturing with the radio. The driver locked the chain into place and started walking back to the truck cab. "Where are you taking it?" I asked. Tiffany pulled a folded paper from her coat pocket and handed it to me. "Impound lot on the east side," she said. "You can retrieve it after you pay the towing fee and the safety violation fine." I unfolded the paper. The fine was $450. The tow fee was another $200. I am rebuilding my finances after a bad year, and I cannot absorb bogus fees like this, not without a fight. I looked at Tiffany. "This is illegal," I said. "You do not have the authority to order a tow without board approval." She tilted her head. "I am the election committee chair. I have emergency enforcement powers during snow events." That was a lie. I had read the bylaws 3 times in the last month because I knew she was coming for me. The bylaws said emergency towing required either a police officer or a unanimous board vote. Tiffany had neither. I folded the paper and shoved it in my pocket. "I will see you at the next board meeting," I said. She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Good luck with that," she said. "The meeting is Thursday, and you will need to submit your complaint in writing by Tuesday." Certified mail only. I already knew that rule. What I did not know yet was that my certified mail would arrive late because of weather, and Tiffany would treat it like my choice, like I was the one sabotaging the process. The tow truck pulled away with my car and I stood there in the sleet, watching the taillights disappear around the corner. Greg walked over, his mail bag slung across his chest. "That was messed up," he said. I nodded. "I need you to be a witness," I said. He shrugged. "I saw the whole thing. She did not post a notice. She did not give you time to move it. I can testify to that." I thanked him, and he headed back to his route. I pulled my phone out and stopped the recording, then uploaded it to 3 different cloud backups. I was not taking chances. Tiffany had already walked back toward the clubhouse, and I could see her through the falling sleet, radio in hand, probably calling someone else to harass. I went inside and peeled off my wet coat and cap. My townhouse was small. 2 bedrooms, barely 900 square feet, but it was mine and I had moved here 6 months ago, because the rent was reasonable and the commute to the airport was manageable. What I did not know at the time was that Woodland Drift Village Association was run like a tiny dictatorship, with Tiffany at the center, manipulating everything from elections to vendor contracts. The neighborhood was a mix of townhouses and duplexes, all built in the 90s, all showing their age. The community portal was full of icy sidewalk photos and accusations, neighbors turning on each other every time the temperature dropped. Tiffany fed that fire, posting warnings and violation notices like she was handing out candy. I sat down at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I had started a folder months ago, back when Tiffany first targeted me over a porch light that stayed on past 10. That complaint went nowhere, but it taught me to document everything. Now the folder had photos, emails, recorded calls, and a timeline that showed a pattern. Tiffany enforced rules selectively, hitting people she did not like while ignoring the same violations on properties owned by her friends. I opened a new document and started drafting a complaint for the board meeting. I needed to get my car back, and I needed to stop Tiffany before she escalated further. But first I had to survive the next 3 days without a vehicle, in the middle of winter, with a client meeting I could not miss. I called a Lyft and spent $60 getting to my meeting across town. The roads were a mess, black ice everywhere, and the driver kept cursing under his breath. I made the meeting with 5 minutes to spare and spent 2 hours going over baggage logistics with a regional manager who wanted faster turnaround times. I nodded and took notes, but my mind was on the impound lot and the $450 fine sitting in my coat pocket. When I got home that afternoon, there was a new notice taped to my front door. It was printed on Woodland Drift Village Association letterhead, and it said I had failed to maintain adequate snow clearance, and my property was now under enhanced monitoring. Enhanced monitoring meant Tiffany could show up anytime, day or night, and issue additional violations. I ripped the notice down and took a photo of it, then added it to the folder. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Tiffany sent to the entire neighborhood listserv. The subject line was Winter Safety Reminder. I opened it and my stomach dropped. The email named me specifically, calling me the one resident who refuses winter safety compliance. It included a photo of my driveway taken from the street, with a red circle drawn around the ski rack. The text said that vehicles obstructing pedestrian pathways would be removed without further notice, and that all residents were expected to follow emergency protocols. It was a public shaming email, designed to turn the neighborhood against me. I scrolled through the replies. A few people defended me, saying the photo did not show any obstruction, but most stayed silent and a handful piled on, agreeing with Tiffany and saying I should just follow the rules. One reply, from a guy named Brad who lived 3 doors down, said I was putting everyone at risk and I should move out if I could not handle HOA life. I closed the email and resisted the urge to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I opened a new draft and typed a reply, keeping it calm and factual. I explained that my sidewalk was clear, my car was on my property, and the tow was unauthorized. I attached a photo of my clean sidewalk and hit send. Within 10 minutes, Tiffany replied, CCing the whole list. She said my complaint was noted but irrelevant because the enforcement action was already in progress and any appeals had to go through the formal process. She included a link to the bylaws and reminded everyone that meetings required written submissions by the Tuesday deadline. I looked at the calendar. It was Saturday. I had 3 days to mail a certified letter and hope it arrived on time in the middle of a winter storm cycle. I printed the complaint, signed it, and drove to the post office Monday morning in a rental car that cost me another $120 for the week. The clerk said certified mail would take 3 to 5 business days, and I told her I needed it there by Tuesday. She shrugged. Weather delays are out of our control, she said. I paid for the fastest option and left, knowing it was a coin flip whether it would arrive in time. Tuesday came and went. Wednesday morning, I checked the tracking number. The letter was stuck in a sorting facility in Portland, delayed by road closures. I called the HOA management company and explained the situation. The woman on the phone said she would note my attempt, but the rules were clear, no exceptions. If my complaint was not in hand by the deadline, I could not present it at the meeting. I asked if I could email it. She said no. I asked if I could deliver it in person. She said the office was closed until Thursday morning, 1 hour before the meeting. I hung up and paced my living room. This was deliberate. Tiffany knew the weather would delay mail. She knew I would miss the deadline. She was stacking the deck and daring me to fight back. I thought about the trump card, the clip I had been holding. It was a recording from a board meeting 2 months ago, a meeting I attended as a guest. During that meeting, Tiffany had pushed through a vote to approve a new snow removal vendor, a company owned by her brother-in-law. The vote passed 4-1. But after the meeting, I overheard Tiffany talking to another board member in the parking lot. She said they needed to clean up the minutes because one of the votes was actually a no, not a yes, and she did not want it on record. I recorded the conversation on my phone. A week later, the official minutes were posted online, and the vote was listed as unanimous, 5-0. That was fraud. That was Tiffany altering the minutes after the meeting to hide dissent and push through a contract. I had not used the recording yet because I was waiting for the right moment, the moment when it would do maximum damage. That moment was coming. Thursday morning, I woke up early and put on a clean shirt and my black puffer jacket. I clipped the ice cleats to my belt loop out of habit, even though I was driving. The board meeting was at 10, and I planned to show up at 9 when the office opened. I would hand deliver my complaint and force them to accept it. If they refused, I would record that refusal and add it to the folder. The roads were better, but still slick. I drove carefully, hands tied on the wheel, and pulled into the clubhouse parking lot at 8:55. Tiffany was already there, standing outside the door with her purple belted wool coat and her radio. She saw me and smiled. "You are late," she said. "The office does not open until 9:30 on meeting days." I stopped in front of her. The email said 9. She shook her head. That was last month. We changed it. I pulled out my phone and opened the email. It said 9. I showed her the screen. She glanced at it and shrugged. Old information. You should check the website. I opened the website on my phone. It said 9:30. The update was dated Monday, 2 days after I mailed my letter. "This is insane," I said. "You are changing deadlines to block complaints." She lifted the radio. "I am enforcing the rules," she said. "You can wait outside until we open." I looked past her and saw movement inside the clubhouse, someone walking through the lobby. The office was already open. Tiffany was lying. I stepped toward the door and she moved to block me. "You are not authorized to enter before operating hours," she said. I do not negotiate with winter violations, and I do not negotiate with procedural violations either. I wanted to push past her, but I knew that would give her ammunition. So I stepped back and pulled out my phone. "I am recording this," I said. "You are refusing to accept my complaint and changing the rules to keep me out of the meeting." She smiled. "Record all you want. The board will review your complaint if it arrives on time through proper channels." I stood there for another 20 minutes, cold seeping through my coat, watching Tiffany pace back and forth with her radio. At 9:30 the door unlocked and she went inside. I followed. The office was a small room with a desk and a filing cabinet and a woman named Linda who handled admin work for the HOA. Linda looked uncomfortable. I handed her my complaint. She glanced at Tiffany, who was standing in the corner. "Is this the winter enforcement case?" Linda asked. "Yes," I said. Linda took the paper and stamped it with the date and time. "I will add it to the agenda," she said. Tiffany stepped forward. "That complaint was due Tuesday," she said. "It is late." Linda looked at the stamp. "It is Thursday. The meeting is today. The rule says complaints must be submitted at least 48 hours before the meeting." Tiffany pulled a binder off the shelf and flipped it open. She pointed to a page. "Right here," she said. 48-hour rule. I leaned over and read the page. It said complaints should be submitted in advance when possible, but it did not say anything about a 48-hour cutoff. I pointed that out. Tiffany snapped the binder shut. "That is the interpretation the board adopted last year," she said. "If you do not like it, you can appeal." This was the second escalation step. First the email blast, now a retaliatory records denial disguised as procedure. I looked at Linda. "I am submitting this complaint," I said. "If the board refuses to hear it, I will file a state procedure complaint." Tiffany laughed. "Go ahead," she said. "The state does not care about HOA squabbles." She walked out of the office, and I heard her boots echoing down the hall toward the meeting room. I sat in the lobby and waited. The meeting started at 10, and I could hear voices through the wall. Tiffany was speaking, loud and confident, laying out her version of events. I checked my phone and saw a text from Greg. He said he was coming to the meeting as a witness. That gave me hope. At 10:15, Linda opened the door and waved me in. The meeting room was a narrow space with a folding table and 6 chairs. 5 board members sat on one side. I sat on the other. Tiffany was at the head of the table, closest to me, her purple coat draped over the back of her chair. She had a stack of papers in front of her and the handheld radio next to them. The board president, a man named Kyle, cleared his throat. "We received your complaint this morning," he said. "We are going to hear your side, but we need to keep this brief. We have a full agenda." I nodded and pulled out my folder. I went through the timeline, showing photos of my clean sidewalk, the tow truck video, and the notice Tiffany posted without authorization. I explained that she did not follow the bylaws, that she issued the tow without board approval, and that she was retaliating because I questioned her enforcement pattern. Tiffany interrupted. "He is lying," she said. I followed procedure. The emergency snow rules give me authority to act without delay. I shook my head. The bylaws say emergency towing requires police or a unanimous board vote. You had neither. She slapped her hand on the table. "That is your interpretation." I pulled out a printed copy of the bylaws and slid it across the table. "Section 12, paragraph 4, I said. Kyle picked it up and read it. His face tightened. Tiffany was already talking, spinning an argument about how the election committee chair had implied powers during emergencies. Kyle held up a hand. "Let him finish," Kyle said. I kept going. I showed the email blast, the changed deadlines, the pattern of selective enforcement. I showed a photo of Brad's driveway, which had snow piled up for 3 days without any notice from Tiffany. I showed another photo of a property 2 blocks over, where a car had been parked across a sidewalk for a week with no action. Kyle looked at Tiffany. Can you explain the discrepancy? He asked. Tiffany pulled her radio into her lap, like she was holding a comfort item. Those situations are different, she said. They did not involve safety hazards. I leaned forward. My car was on my property with a roof rack. How is that a safety hazard? She did not answer. Kyle looked at the other board members. We need to vote on whether the tow is authorized, he said. Before we do, does anyone have additional information? That was my moment. I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app. I have something, I said. I played the clip out loud in the meeting so Karen could not talk over it. The audio was clear. Tiffany's voice, saying they needed to clean up the minutes. The other board member's voice, agreeing. Then the sound of car doors closing and engines starting. I paused it. That was November 9th, I said. 2 months ago. The board voted 4-1 on the snow removal vendor contract. But the official minutes say the vote was unanimous. I opened the meeting minutes on my laptop and turned the screen toward Kyle. He read it, then looked at Tiffany. Did you alter the minutes? He asked. Tiffany stood up, her chair scraping backward. That recording is illegal, she said. You cannot use it. I stayed calm. Oregon is a one-party consent state, I said. I was part of the conversation. The recording is legal. Kyle looked at the other board members. This is a serious allegation, he said. If the minutes were altered, that is a violation of state HOA law. We need to investigate. Tiffany grabbed her coat. This is a witch hunt, she said. I am not sitting here and listening to this. She walked toward the door, but Kyle stood up. Sit down, Tiffany, he said. We are not done. She stopped, but did not sit. Kyle turned to me. Do you have any other evidence, he asked. I nodded. I filed a records request 3 weeks ago asking for vendor contracts and enforcement logs. The response said I had to pay $200 in copy fees and wait 30 days. That is retaliation. Oregon law says HOA records have to be available within 10 business days for a reasonable fee. $200 for PDFs is not reasonable. Kyle wrote something down. We will review that, he said. He looked at Tiffany. Did you approve that response? She crossed her arms. I followed the records policy. Kyle shook his head. We do not have a records policy that allows fees like that, he said. Who set that number? Tiffany did not answer. One of the other board members, a woman named Janet, spoke up. I have a question, she said. She looked at me. You said the vote was 4-1, but the minutes say unanimous. Who was the no vote? I pulled up my notes. It was Tom, I said. Tom resigned from the board in December. Janet nodded slowly. So the dissent disappeared when Tom left. That is convenient. Kyle stood up. We are going to take a 15-minute recess, he said. Board members only. Stay here. He gestured to Tiffany. You too. They went into a side room and I sat at the table, alone with my folder and my phone. I could hear muffled voices through the wall, rising and falling. At one point, someone shouted. I could not make out the words, but the tone was clear. 15 minutes turned into 25. When they came back, Kyle looked exhausted. We have made a decision, he said. The board votes to reverse the tow and refund all fees. We are also suspending enforcement actions by the election committee pending an investigation into the vendor contract and the altered minutes. Tiffany tried to interrupt and the meeting voted anyway. The vote was 4-1, with Tiffany as the only dissent. Kyle continued. We are referring this matter to the HOA attorney for a formal review, he said. If the minutes were altered, that is grounds for removal from the board. Until the review is complete, Tiffany is removed from all enforcement duties. Tiffany slammed her hand on the table. You cannot do this, she said. I have emergency powers. Kyle shook his head. You had emergency powers, he said. Not anymore. Janet leaned forward. We are also canceling the snow removal vendor contract, she said. If it was approved through fraudulent minutes, it is void. We will go back to the previous vendor. That was the HOA consequence. The HOA canceled the vendor relationship tied to the abuse. Tiffany grabbed her coat and her radio and walked out. The door slammed behind her and the sound echoed through the clubhouse. Kyle looked at me. I apologize, he said. This should not have happened. We will get your car back today and issue a formal apology. I nodded. I also want the enforcement logs, I said. All of them. For the last 2 years. Kyle hesitated, then agreed. We will provide those within 10 days, he said. The meeting ended, and I walked out into the cold. Greg was waiting in the lobby. He gave me a thumbs up. Told you she was dirty, he said. That afternoon, I got a call from the impound lot. The HOA had authorized the release and waived all fees. I picked up my car and drove home, the ski rack still on the roof, the ice cleats still clipped to my belt loop. Tiffany did not give up. 2 days later, she posted another email to the listserv, claiming the board had overstepped and violated her rights. She said she was filing a countercomplaint and demanding reinstatement. The email was long and rambling and full of accusations. Most of the neighborhood ignored it. A few people replied, telling her to let it go. Brad, the guy who had piled on earlier, apologized in a separate email. He said he did not know the full story, and he was glad the board acted. I did not reply to any of it. I was done engaging with Tiffany on her terms. Instead, I filed a state procedure complaint with the Oregon Department of Justice, citing the altered minutes, the retaliatory records fees, and the unauthorized tow. The complaint form was straightforward, and I attached all the evidence, including the recording and the email trail. The state confirmed receipt within 48 hours and said they would investigate. 3 weeks later, I got a letter from the HOA attorney. The letter said the investigation had confirmed that Tiffany altered the minutes and issued the tow without authority. The attorney recommended her removal from the board and a formal policy change requiring documented proof and 2 approvals before any tow could be ordered. The board voted on the recommendations at the next meeting. The vote was unanimous. Tiffany was removed. The policy changes passed. The vendor contract was officially voided and the previous snow removal company was reinstated. The attorney also noted that Tiffany's selective enforcement pattern had been documented in the minutes, ensuring it would be part of the permanent record. That was Karen's consequence. Karen's own selective enforcement got documented in the minutes. The state procedure complaint forced the HOA to respond, and they could not ignore the evidence. Tiffany tried to sue the HOA for wrongful removal, but her lawyer dropped the case after reviewing the evidence. She moved out of Woodland Drift 3 months later. The neighborhood got quieter after that. The listserv stopped being a war zone. People still argued about snow removal and parking and noise, but it felt normal, not weaponized. Kyle stayed on as board president, and he made a point of being transparent, posting meeting agendas early, and responding to emails within 24 hours. I stayed in my townhouse and kept my sidewalk clear, and my documentation habits sharp. I never needed the folder again, but I kept it, just in case. If you enjoyed this story, hit like and subscribe for more HOA drama where the Karens get buried by their own rules. Winter in Hillsborough is a strange thing. The snow comes in waves, heavy and wet, and the city is never quite prepared. The plows run late, the salt trucks miss streets, people panic and hoard supplies, and then the snow melts in 3 days and everyone forgets until the next storm. I got used to it. I bought better boots, a heavy-duty scraper, and a bag of ice melt that I kept in my trunk. I learned which streets flooded when the snow melted too fast, and which intersections turned into skating rinks. The airport job kept me busy, and I worked a lot of overnight shifts, supervising crews as they loaded bags into cargo holds and troubleshot jams and delays. It was physical work, cold work, and it taught me patience. You cannot rush a jammed conveyor belt. You cannot yell a late flight into being on time. You just solve the problem, one step at a time, and move on. That mindset helped when I dealt with Tiffany. She wanted to provoke me, to make me blow up so she could frame me as unstable. I did not give her that. I stayed calm, documented everything, and waited for the right moment. The right moment came, and it worked. A few months after Tiffany left, the board hired a property management company to handle enforcement. The company was professional, polite, and followed the rules exactly. If you got a notice, it came with photos, a citation of the specific bylaw, and a clear timeline for compliance. If you had a question, you could call an actual person who would explain the issue without yelling or moving cones around like a tyrant. It was boring and functional and exactly what the neighborhood needed. I ran into Greg one afternoon while I was shoveling my driveway after a January storm. He was finishing his route and he stopped to chat. "You hear Tiffany is working for another HOA?" he asked. I shook my head. Where? Beaverton, he said. Some gated community. I heard she lasted 2 weeks before they fired her. Apparently, she tried the same enforcement tricks, and they had cameras everywhere. I laughed. Good, I said. Greg nodded. You did the neighborhood a favor, he said. No one wanted to say it, but everyone was scared of her. She had this way of making you feel like you were always one step away from a fine or a lien. It messed with people. I kept shoveling, and Greg kept walking, and the snow kept falling. That was the rhythm of winter in Woodland Drift. Quiet days, sudden storms, and the slow work of keeping your path clear. The policy changes the board passed made a real difference. The two-approval rule meant no one person could authorize a tow or a lien. Every enforcement action had to go through a checklist, and if any step was skipped, the action was void. The board also created a review committee to handle complaints, and they made it mandatory for all enforcement records to be posted online within 72 hours. Transparency killed the selective enforcement problem. If you got a notice, you could check the enforcement log and see if your neighbor got the same notice for the same issue. If they did not, you had grounds to appeal. It was not perfect, but it was fair, and fair was enough. I thought about the trump card a lot in those weeks after the meeting. I had held onto that recording for 2 months, waiting for the right moment, and it paid off. But it was risky. If I had played it too early, Tiffany could have spun it or dismissed it. If I had waited too long, the board might have acted without needing it. Timing mattered. Evidence mattered. And knowing when to keep your mouth shut and let the other side bury themselves mattered most of all. The snow kept coming through February. One night, I got home from a late shift and found a notice on my door. For a second, my chest tightened, the old panic reflex kicking in. Then I read it. It was from the new management company, letting me know that a tree branch had fallen on the shared fence between my unit and the neighbors, and they would send a crew to remove it in the morning. No fine. No violation. Just information. I went inside and made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, looking out at the snow piling up in the courtyard. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Kyle. The subject line said, "Final report." I opened it. The email said the state investigation had concluded and found multiple violations by Tiffany, including records tampering, unauthorized enforcement, and retaliation. The state issued a formal reprimand to the HOA and required them to implement additional oversight measures. Kyle attached the full report and thanked me for bringing the issues to light. He also said the board had voted to reimburse me for the rental car and the legal costs I incurred during the fight. The check would be in the mail within 10 days. I closed the laptop and looked out the window again. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes that stuck to the glass and piled up on the sill. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that only happens during a heavy snowfall when the world muffles itself and everything slows down. I thought about the first day Tiffany screamed at me over my sidewalk, how she waved that ice scraper like a weapon and called the tow truck like she owned the place. I thought about the fear I felt, the anger, the sense that the system was rigged and there was no way to win. But I did win. Not because I was louder or meaner or more connected. I won because I was patient and I gathered proof and I waited for the exact right moment to deploy it. That was the lesson. Power is not about volume or authority or who has the biggest pile of cones. Power is about leverage. And leverage is about knowing what you have, when to use it, and how to make it count. The next morning, I woke up early and cleared my driveway before the plow came through. The sky was gray and heavy, and the forecast said another 6 inches by evening. I salted the sidewalk and checked the mailbox and went inside to get ready for work. As I was locking the door, I saw a car pull into the visitor lot. It was a sedan with a magnetic sign on the door, some kind of contractor. A woman got out, clipboard in hand, and started walking toward the clubhouse. She had a yellow coat and a confident stride, and for a second I wondered if she was another Tiffany, another person ready to turn the neighborhood into a battleground over minor infractions. Then I reminded myself that the board had systems in place now. The policies were clear. The records were public. If someone tried to pull what Tiffany pulled, they would not last a week. I drove to work and spent the day moving bags and fixing jams and talking crews through the chaos of winter delays. When I got home that night, the snow was piled high again, and the plows had left a ridge of ice across my driveway. I grabbed the shovel and got to work, the ice cleats clipped to my belt loop clinking with every step. Greg walked by, finishing his route, and waved. "Another one," he said, gesturing at the snow. I nodded. "Always another one." He laughed and kept walking. I kept shoveling. The rhythm was steady, repetitive, almost meditative. Scrape, lift, toss. Scrape, lift, toss. My breath puffed white in the cold, and my arms started to ache, but I kept going. By the time I finished, the driveway was clear, and the sidewalk was salted, and the porch light was on. I stood there for a minute, looking at the work, feeling the cold bite through my gloves. It was not glamorous. It was not exciting. But it was mine, and no one was going to take it from me. Spring came eventually. The snow melted, and the streets flooded and then dried out. The trees budded, and the grass came back, and the neighborhood shifted into a different set of conflicts. Noise complaints and landscaping disputes and arguments over the pool schedule. I stayed out of most of it. I paid my dues on time, kept my property clean, and showed up to the annual meeting to vote. Kyle was re-elected as board president, and he ran a smooth meeting. No drama, no shouting, just business. Afterward, he pulled me aside. "I wanted to thank you again," he said. "What you did, bringing that evidence forward, it changed the culture here. We were heading toward a lawsuit or worse. You stopped it." I shrugged. "I just wanted my car back," I said. He laughed. "Well, you got that and a lot more. The board is functional now. People trust us again. That matters." I nodded. It did matter. Trust is fragile in a place like an HOA, where everyone is forced to share space and follow rules they did not write. When trust breaks, the whole thing falls apart into feuds and paranoia and endless complaints. But when trust works, even a little, the place runs itself. People follow the rules because the rules make sense, not because someone is screaming at them with a radio. Kyle shook my hand and walked back toward the clubhouse. I got in my car and drove home, windows down, spring air rushing in. The ski rack was still on the roof. I had not taken it off, partly out of spite, partly because I liked having it there, a reminder that I won. Not just the fight with Tiffany, but the bigger fight. The fight to live in a place where rules applied evenly and power had limits. The neighborhood was not perfect. There were still arguments and petty complaints and people who treated every bylaw like a personal insult. But it was better, and better was enough. I got a text from Greg a few weeks later. He said Tiffany was suing the HOA after all, despite her lawyer dropping the case. She filed it herself, pro se, claiming defamation and wrongful termination. The board hired an attorney to defend, and Greg said the hearing was set for July. I was not worried. The evidence was clear. The recording, the emails, the enforcement logs, all of it pointed to the same conclusion. Tiffany had abused her position, and the board acted appropriately. A judge would see that. And even if the case dragged on, I had done my part. I had gathered the proof, filed the complaint, and forced the system to work. The rest was up to the lawyers and the courts. That was fine. I had work to do, a life to live, and a driveway to keep clear when winter came back around. The hearing happened in a courthouse hallway on a hot July afternoon. The building was old, high ceilings and marble floors, and it smelled like floor polish and stale coffee. I showed up because the HOA attorney asked me to be available as a witness. I wore a button-down shirt and khakis and sat on a bench outside the courtroom, waiting. Tiffany arrived 20 minutes late. She was alone, carrying a binder and a tote bag stuffed with papers. She saw me, and her expression hardened. She walked past without saying anything and went into the courtroom. The attorney, a guy named Ron, came out and waved me in. The hearing was short. Tiffany argued that the board had violated her rights by removing her without a formal vote. Ron presented the meeting minutes showing the vote was unanimous and properly recorded. Tiffany argued that the recording I played was illegal. Ron cited Oregon one-party consent law, and the judge agreed. Tiffany argued that the vendor contract was legitimate. Ron presented the original minutes showing a 4-1 vote and the altered minutes showing unanimous approval. The judge asked Tiffany if she had altered the minutes. She hesitated, then said she made corrections for clarity. The judge asked if those corrections changed the vote count. She did not answer. The judge ruled from the bench. He said the evidence was clear that Tiffany had altered official HOA records and issued enforcement actions without proper authority. He dismissed her lawsuit and ordered her to pay the HOA's legal fees. Tiffany stood up, grabbed her binder, and walked out. The whole thing took less than an hour. Ron walked me out, and we stood on the courthouse steps. That was clean, he said. She did not have a case. I nodded. What happens now? I asked. Ron shrugged. She pays the fees or the court garnishes her wages. Either way, it is over. The HOA is protected and the policy changes stay in place. I thanked him and drove home. The sky was bright and clear and the temperature was in the 80s. I stopped at a coffee shop on the way and sat outside, watching people walk by, thinking about how strange the whole thing had been. A fight over a roof rack and a sidewalk, escalating into altered records and state complaints in a courtroom. It felt absurd, but it also felt important. Because if no one had fought back, Tiffany would still be there, still moving cones and authorizing illegal towels and manipulating votes. Someone had to say no. Someone had to gather proof and file complaints and show up to the hearing. That someone was me. And I was glad I did it. I finished my coffee and drove the rest of the way home. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw a package on my porch. I got out and picked it up. It was a check from the HOA, reimbursement for the rental car and legal costs, plus a formal letter of apology from the board. I opened the letter. It was short, one paragraph, signed by Kyle. It said the board appreciated my diligence and patience, and they were committed to ensuring fair and transparent enforcement going forward. I folded the letter and went inside. That night I updated my folder, adding the court ruling and the reimbursement check. Then I backed up everything to 3 cloud drives and an external hard drive. I did not think I would need it again. But if I did, it would be there, ready, a full record of everything that happened. Winter came back the following November. The first snow was light, just a dusting that melted by noon. But the forecast said bigger storms were coming and the neighborhood started preparing, stocking up on salt and ice melt and firewood. I cleared my driveway early, before the rush, and made sure my shovel and scraper were in good shape. I even bought a new pair of ice cleats, heavier duty, better grip. The new management company sent out an email reminding everyone of the snow removal rules. The tone was polite, informative, not threatening. It listed the deadlines, the procedures, and the contact info if you had questions. No one panicked. No one sent angry replies. It was normal, functional, boring. Exactly what it should be. The first big storm hit in December. 6 inches overnight, then another 4 by morning. I woke up early and started clearing my driveway. Halfway through, Greg walked by. He stopped and leaned on his mail cart. "You ready for another season of this?" he asked. I nodded. "Always ready." He laughed. "At least it is quiet now. No more Tiffany screaming at people over every flake." I smiled. Yeah. That was an improvement. He kept walking, and I kept shoveling. The snow was heavy and wet, and my arms were burning by the time I finished. But the driveway was clear, and the sidewalk was salted, and I felt good. I went inside and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, looking out at the white landscape. My phone buzzed. It was an email from the HOA, a reminder that the annual meeting was coming up in January. I marked it on my calendar and closed the email. Life went on. The neighborhood went on. The snow kept falling and people kept clearing it, and the rules kept working. Because someone was willing to fight for them when they did not. That someone was me. And I would do it again if I had to. But I hoped I would not have to. I hoped the systems held. I hoped the board stayed transparent and the management company stayed fair, and no one else tried to turn winter enforcement into a personal vendetta. Hope is a fragile thing in an HOA. But so is everything else. You build what you can, you protect what matters, and you keep your documentation habits sharp, just in case. The rest of winter passed without major incident. A few notices went out for late snow removal, but they were issued evenly and no one complained. The management company handled everything professionally, and the board stayed out of the enforcement weeds. In February, there was a brief scare when someone claimed their car was towed without notice, but the management company produced a photo log showing 3 warnings posted over 5 days. The complaint was dropped. Spring came again, then summer, then fall. The cycle repeated, and the neighborhood settled into a rhythm that felt stable. I got a promotion at work, a shift to days, which meant I could finally sleep normal hours and see sunlight. The pay bump helped, and I started saving again, rebuilding the financial cushion that Tiffany's fines and fees had damaged. I thought about moving, finding a place without an HOA, somewhere I could do whatever I wanted without worrying about bylaws and enforcement and boards. But I stayed. Partly because moving was expensive and complicated, partly because I liked my townhouse and my neighbors and the location, but mostly because I had fought for this place and won, and leaving felt like giving up on that victory. So, I stayed. And when winter came back, I cleared my driveway and salted my sidewalk and clipped my ice cleats to my belt loop, ready for whatever the season brought. The second winter after Tiffany left was the coldest on record. The snow started in November and did not stop until March. The plows ran nonstop. The salt trucks could not keep up. The city declared emergencies twice, and schools closed for a week straight. The neighborhood handled it. People helped each other, clearing driveways for elderly neighbors, sharing bags of ice melt, posting updates in the community portal about road conditions. The board stayed on top of it, coordinating with the snow removal vendor and making sure pathways stayed clear. It was not perfect. There were complaints about plow damage and delayed responses and uneven clearing. But no one was targeted. No one was singled out. The rules applied to everyone, and when someone broke them, the enforcement was consistent and documented. That was all anyone could ask for. I ran into Kyle at the grocery store one afternoon in late February. The parking lot was a mess of slush and ice, and we both had to navigate carefully to our cars. He waved and walked over. "Surviving?" he asked. "Barely," I said. "This winter is brutal." He nodded. "Tell me about it." "The board is getting complaints every day, but at least they are about the weather, not about enforcement." "That is progress." I agreed. It was progress. Small, incremental, boring progress. But it mattered. Kyle hesitated, then said something I did not expect. "You know, the board talked about asking you to join. We have an open seat, and we could use someone with your eye for detail." I shook my head. "I appreciate it, but no thanks. I have had enough HOA drama for a lifetime." He laughed. "Fair enough. But if you change your mind, the offer stands." We shook hands and went our separate ways. I thought about his offer as I drove home. Part of me was tempted. I knew how the system worked now. I knew where the gaps were and how to fix them. But another part of me, the bigger part, wanted nothing to do with it. I had spent a year fighting Tiffany and the broken system she represented. I did not want to spend the next 5 years managing that system, dealing with petty complaints and budget fights and neighbors who treated every bylaw like a personal attack. I wanted to live my life, do my job, and keep my driveway clear. That was enough. So I said no. And I kept saying no every time someone suggested I get more involved. I showed up to meetings when it mattered. I voted. I paid my dues. But I did not join committees or volunteer for task forces or spend my evenings debating parking rules. I had done my part. The system worked now. Let someone else maintain it. The third winter was mild. Barely any snow, just rain and slush and gray skies. The neighborhood relaxed. Complaints dropped. The board ran smooth meetings. The management company handled enforcement without drama. It felt normal, boring, safe. And that was good. That was what I had fought for, not excitement or recognition or power. Just a neighborhood where the rules made sense and applied evenly, and no one had to fear a vindictive board member with a radio and a pile of cones. I kept my documentation folder though. I updated it occasionally, adding new bylaws and meeting minutes and photos of my property. I backed it up regularly. I did not think I would need it again, but if I did, it would be there, ready, just in case. Because that is the thing about HOAs. They can be functional and fair and boring for years. And then one day, someone new moves in, someone with an agenda, and the whole thing starts sliding sideways again. When that happens, you need proof. You need records. you need leverage, and you need to know when to use it. I learned that the hard way, and I will never forget it. One evening in late March, I was sitting on my porch watching the last of the snow melt when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Greg. "Did you hear about Tiffany?" he asked. I replied, "No. What happened?" He sent a link. It was a local news article about an HOA dispute in Beaverton. A woman had been charged with harassment and trespassing after repeatedly entering a neighbor's property to issue violation notices. The article did not name her, but it described her as a former board member with a history of enforcement complaints. I did not need a name. I knew it was Tiffany. Greg texted again. Same playbook. Different neighborhood. Glad you shut her down here. I put my phone away and leaned back in my chair. The air was cool and damp and smelled like wet pavement and budding trees. Spring was coming. The neighborhood was quiet. My driveway was clear. And Tiffany was someone else's problem now. I felt bad for whoever was dealing with her in Beaverton. But I also felt relief. Because it could have been me. It almost was me. If I had not fought back, if I had not gathered evidence and filed complaints and shown up to that meeting, Tiffany would still be here, still terrorizing neighbors, still manipulating votes and altering records. Someone had to stop her. And I did. That was enough. That was everything. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the courtyard. I watched a few neighbors come home from work, pulling into their driveways, unloading groceries, going inside. Normal life. Quiet life. The kind of life that only works when the rules are fair and the people in charge follow them. I stood up and went inside. The townhouse was warm and the kitchen smelled like coffee. I sat down at the table and opened my laptop. I had an email from Kyle. The subject line said, "Thank you." I opened it. The email was short. It said the board had just closed the investigation into Tiffany and filed the final report with the state. The report confirmed all the findings, altered minutes, unauthorized enforcement, retaliatory records fees, and recommended policy changes that were now in place across the HOA. Kyle said the neighborhood was in a better place because of my willingness to step forward, and he wanted to thank me again. I closed the email and shut the laptop. I did not need thanks. I just needed the system to work. And it did. Finally. After months of fighting and documenting and waiting for the right moment, it worked. That was the victory. Not the court ruling or the reimbursement check or the apology letter. The victory was that the next person who faced what I faced would have a fair process to follow. They would have transparent records and clear deadlines and a board that followed its own rules. They would not have to fight alone. They would not have to wonder if the system was rigged. Because it was not. Not anymore. I made dinner, watched some TV, and went to bed early. Outside, the last patches of snow were melting into the grass. Winter was over, and I had survived it. The next morning, I woke up to clear skies and bright sun. I made coffee and sat on my porch, watching the neighborhood come to life. A few kids were riding bikes in the courtyard. A couple was walking a dog. Greg was starting his route, mail cart loaded, waving at people as he passed. It was a good morning. A normal morning. The kind of morning that only happens when no one is screaming about sidewalks or moving cones or threatening tows. I finished my coffee and went inside. I had work in a few hours, and I wanted to get a run in before my shift. I laced up my shoes, clipped my keys to my belt loop where the ice cleats used to be, and headed out. The air was cool and fresh, and the streets were dry. I ran my usual loop, 3 miles through the neighborhood and back. When I got home, I saw a notice on my door. My chest tightened for half a second. Then I read it. It was a reminder about the community cleanup day next weekend. Volunteers needed. Bring gloves and trash bags. No fine, no violation, just information. I smiled and went inside. That was how it should be. Simple. Functional. Fair. And if it ever stopped being that way, I would be ready. I had my folder. I had my evidence. I had my voice. And I knew how to use them. Because that is what it takes to live in an HOA. Not blind compliance. Not silent resentment. But the willingness to fight when the system breaks, and the patience to build it back when the fight is won. I did that. and I would do it again. But for now, I was going to enjoy the quiet, enjoy the spring, enjoy the fact that my biggest worry was whether to volunteer for cleanup day, not whether Tiffany was going to tow my car or alter the minutes or scream at me over an ice scraper. Life was good. Life was normal. And normal was everything. The years kept passing, and the neighborhood stayed stable. There were board elections and budget meetings and the usual small conflicts over landscaping and parking and pool hours. But nothing like Tiffany. Nothing that required state complaints or courtroom hearings or recordings played at meetings. Kyle served 2 more terms as board president before stepping down. Janet took over and ran things with the same steady hand, transparent and fair. The management company stayed professional. The enforcement logs stayed public. The 2 approval rules stayed in place. And the neighborhood thrived. Property values went up. New families moved in. The community portal shifted from a war zone to a place where people shared recipes and asked for contractor recommendations and posted photos of their gardens. It was boring. It was functional. It was exactly what an HOA should be. I stayed in my townhouse. I got another promotion at work, moved into management, and started mentoring younger supervisors on how to handle chaos without losing their cool. The skills I learned fighting Tiffany translated well. Stay calm, document everything, wait for the right moment, and never let someone bully you into giving up your leverage. Those lessons worked in baggage handling. They worked in HOA disputes. They worked everywhere. One winter evening, 5 years after the fight with Tiffany, I was clearing my driveway after a light snow when a car pulled up. A woman got out, middle-aged, blonde hair, expensive coat. She walked over with a clipboard. "Excuse me," she said. "I am with the board. We have had complaints about snow removal, and I am doing a compliance check." I stopped shoveling and looked at her. "Complaints from who?" I asked. She hesitated. "That is confidential, but I need to inspect your sidewalk and driveway to ensure they meet the safety standards." I leaned on my shovel. "What is your name?" I asked. She told me. I did not recognize it. "When did you join the board?" I asked. "Last month," she said. "I was elected to the enforcement committee." I nodded slowly. "Okay. Do you have a copy of the bylaws with you?" She blinked. "What?" "The bylaws," I said. "The enforcement committee is required to carry a copy during inspections." Section 18, paragraph 2. She frowned. "I do not think that is accurate." I pulled out my phone and opened the bylaws PDF. I had kept it bookmarked for moments like this. I scrolled to section 18 and turned the screen toward her. She read it and her expression tightened. "Fine," she said. "I will get a copy and come back." I shook my head. "You do not need to come back. My sidewalk is clear. My driveway is clear. If you have a complaint, you need to document it with photos and timestamps and submit it through the management company. You cannot just show up and demand an inspection." She looked at me like I had challenged her authority, which I had. "Who are you?" she asked. "I am a resident," I said. "And I know the rules." She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked back to her car. She drove off and I went back to shoveling. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Kyle. He was not on the board anymore, but he still lived in the neighborhood and people kept him in the loop. "Did you just have a run-in with the new enforcement chair?" he asked. I replied, "Yeah." She showed up without a copy of the bylaws. He sent back a laughing emoji. "She is going to hate you." "Good. Keep her honest." I finished shoveling and went inside. I did not hear from the new enforcement chair again. But I heard through the grapevine that she tried to push through a bunch of new rules at the next board meeting, and Janet shut her down, citing the transparency requirements and the 2 approval process. The woman resigned 3 months later. The board replaced her with someone quieter, someone who followed the rules and did not try to turn enforcement into a power trip. And the neighborhood stayed stable. Because the systems held, the policies worked, and people like me were willing to push back when someone tried to break them. That was the real victory. Not beating Tiffany, not winning in court, but creating a culture where the next Tiffany could not get a foothold, where the rules mattered more than personalities, where transparency and fairness were not just ideals but enforced realities. I kept my folder updated. I kept my documentation habits sharp. I kept my ice cleats clipped to my belt loop every winter, ready for whatever the season brought. Because that is what it takes. Not just to survive an HOA, but to make it work, to make it fair. To make it a place where people can live without fear of vindictive board members and arbitrary enforcement and rules that only apply when someone with a clipboard decides they do. I did that. We did that. The board, the management company, the neighbors who spoke up and showed up and refused to let the system slide back into chaos. We built something better. And it lasted. That was enough. That was everything. Winter turned to spring, spring turned to summer, and the cycle continued. The neighborhood kept running, quiet and functional, exactly as it should be. And I kept living my life, clearing my driveway, doing my job, and knowing that if the system ever broke again, I had the tools to fix it. I hope your property line stays drama-free.